Hey everyone, and welcome to the Ncast. I'm Guy Weissmantel, your host and Executive Vice President of Marketing here at Ncontracts. In this podcast, our subject matter experts from across the company will be talking with industry thought leaders about relevant topics and trends in compliance and risk management for financial institutions. You'll learn the latest tips and tools to manage risk in this ever-changing environment. Let's get started.
Hello, this is Stephanie Lyon, VP of Compliance at Ncontracts, and today I have the pleasure of being joined by my good friend Denise Guira, SVP of Integrated Risk at MIDFLORIDA Credit Union. How are you today?
I'm evaluating some life decision making, scheduling this for 8 o'clock the day after daylight savings time. But outside of that, I'm doing great. How are you?
I am doing phenomenal. Also evaluating that decision, but here we are.
You kind of got roped in this decision because I was like, let's do it.
That's amazing. So today we're going to talk a little bit about risk management and compliance. I know you've served both roles at your credit union. So how do you define a risk-based approach to compliance?
I would say is the only path forward. So a risk-based approach for compliance, I feel like the two work incredibly in tandem. You have to, it's one of the 7 categories of risk as far as NCUA is concerned. So, and I feel like it's kind of the foundation and the lowest hanging fruit, especially if you're new to this risk environment. It's the easiest path forward to try to get some traction in your risk program and start evaluating risk at your organization. All of that information is outlined in regards to manuals, FFIC journals, regulation. There's a lot of wheels out there that you can kind of leverage and add to your car to kind of move that forward. And I would also say that it is probably the most listened to risk in the organization. When you talk about other types of risk, they're kind of subjective in nature. You can sit around a table, you can have a discussion, people can kind of say, well, that's within my tolerance. We want to take that kind of risk. But when you get to compliance, it's very black and white. So it kind of is a very easy way to kind of say, this is acceptable risk. This is not acceptable risk. And then kind of branch that conversation off into your other concentrations. Like compliance risk and reputation risk, they kind of hang out together at the same lunch table. And it's really easy to kind of have that conversation with the people in your organization to kind of start that process. Compliance risk is easy for people to understand. They've been dealing with it for a very long period of time. They usually have a comfortability and familiarity with it. So it's an easy place to start.
You're not wrong about that. We do like to hang out at the same lunch table. So how do you feel risk and compliance really intersect together? We know we've been hearing a lot about ERM, enterprise risk management, and you said compliance is something that's been around forever. So how do you compile the two into one?
I think that you should really use compliance as a tool when you kind of take a look at your ERM landscape. The first thing, when you take a look at ERM, there's so many different offshoots and so many different ways that you can take that program within your organization that using compliance, especially when you're just getting started, as a roadmap and kind of a honing stick as to where you want to have those focuses and where you kind of want to set those strategic pillars would be a really good first step. So we just went through this, over the past couple of years. I've been kind of growing the program at MIDFLORIDA. I started it in its inception and have kind of been trying to find a path forward since then. And, we sat down, put all of our processes on paper and then, tried to correlate them against regulation and then our products and services. Next thing you know, I'm looking at a list of, 600 to 700 different things. And it's like, where am I going to go with this? What am I going to do as far as board reporting is concerned? What am I going to do as far as really creating a risk picture and a risk narrative that is not overwhelming and really makes sense to everyone and really tells a true picture of risk? And I feel like the best way to kind of start is to evaluate the risk exposure of compliance. To kind of take a look at all those regulations, see where your violations are at before, see what type of lending products that you have, see what complaints you have out there in the marketplace, what kind of procedures you have, related to those processes, like such as fair lending. What does that look like in your organization? And then processes like fair lending that are such a big impact to the organization, have so many different components that really relate to risk, will also make you feel better as a risk practitioner, because it'll give you confidence in your organization's practices, right? So if you go through that process and you take a look at those procedures and you start really evaluating against those 7 concentrations of risk, start seeing that's what's out there, then you can say, okay, my credit union's kind of got this. My credit union kind of understands. And it kind of, you can use compliance as a tool to really figure out where your credit union is and kind of use it as the barometer that you need to figure out where you need to set your focus.
So you just mentioned fair lending, and we know that fair lending is made up of a lot of regulations with a lot of regulatory requirements, a lot of guidance out there. So how much compliance knowledge do you feel a risk manager has to understand and know to effectively manage compliance risk?
Just enough to be incredibly dangerous.
So how much is enough?
Like 007. I would say that it is very unique to the different credit unions that you're working at, right? You have to decide what your environment looks like. Do you have a dedicated compliance department? What is that compliance department comprised of? How many, employees? What's their background? How much education do they have? What is your company's culture in relation to risk? As risk, we get to have different conversations. We are the consulting body. We are the friend. We are the coordinator. We are somebody that gets to come in and kind of say, look, you can accept the risk or not. This is your business unit's decision. And sometimes that allows better conversations. You can kind of open the door for compliance, and you can kind of say, yes, we know compliance, this regulation can be difficult to listen to. This regulation can be difficult to adhere to. I know there's a new administration, all blah, 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 but it allows you to be able to have purposeful and educational conversations. So what I say, as somebody that I was a compliance officer for 17 years before I moved into risk, does that knowledge serve me incredibly well? Yes. Do you need 17 years of knowledge to be able to be a risk practitioner? No. Having somebody like that has, been there for 17 years in your compliance department, maybe be friends with that person, leverage the resources that are out there in the world, partner with great partners like Ncontracts, who employ incredibly intelligent and beautiful people like Stephanie Lyons. Really just read and learn and, take a look at the different things that are out there and look at it from that risk standpoint, because compliance is going to say, this is what the reg says, black and white. Okay. That's their role. Their role is 100%, adherence to, zero risk tolerance. You get to have a different conversation. You get to say, this is what the rules of the playground are. Okay. There's glass in this sandbox. This slide has been in the sun, really hot for days, but let's play in this playground. Okay. And these are the ways that we can play and keep us safe.
So you were just mentioning that, again, that intersection between risk and compliance, but how do you feel a risk manager can help compliance effectively communicate the importance of compliance in the risk conversation? You mentioned you can have a little bit of a higher tolerance. So how is that conversation best had?
I think that the best way to correlate and kind of help that risk conversation and that compliance conversation is by being a partner to compliance. We are kind of at the same lunch table, like I talked about before, and people are more willing to let you come to their lunch table sometimes than people are more willing to let compliance come to the lunch table. I had a really funny story last week where I was having a conversation with one of the management team in my organization, and he equated me to that character from Monsters, Inc., the one that's like, turn in your reports. And I was literally like, is that how you see me? But it's great because I get to have that conversation, that kind of tongue-in-cheek conversation where he knows that I'm going to keep him protected. He knows that my role is to just kind of tell him where those traps are in the playground, but not to keep him from playing. Like, go out, have a good time. And I think that sometimes and compliance, you can kind of really fall into that Chicken Little, you know, the sky is falling. I am concerned that the credit union, you know, my butt is on the line, and I need to be that first line of defense for compliance. And I think that sometimes we can help soften that message, you know, and kind of really help facilitate understanding of, this is what compliance is saying. Here's what it means for our organization and our credit union. So, and not that a compliance practitioner themselves can't do so. I did so for years, but you know, there's definitely a shift in thinking in regards to old school compliance, in regards to 100%. This is the only way and path forward, and a new thought process when you take a risk approach and combine that compliance knowledge with risk, where you say, okay, but what exits can we take, you know, that are safe?
I like that a lot, because you're right. Compliance is all about interpreting the rule, but ultimately there are so many different ways you can get to that end result. So that's a great point. So how do you view the role of internal committees in working effectively for company-wide culture of risk management and compliance management?
Okay. I think there's actually two ways that I'm going to take this, if you will indulge me. You know, I mean, you kind of have to. I kind of have you hostage here. But there are two different thoughts here. So one, you can use internal committees to kind of help drive your program. You know, MIDFLORIDA is a multi-billion, you know, asset organization. So we have to work with an internal structure outside of our board. So our board has deferred some responsibility and some caretaking of the ERM program to our oversight committee. That oversight committee meets quarterly. It's comprised of senior management team in our organization, and really helps drive the focus, the agenda, the intention of the ERM program. Like, it allows my program to be purposeful and meaningful to management and to the board. So I think that that is a very easy way to kind of use that internal committee. And it's comprised of your stakeholders, right? So it is a reoccurring opportunity to create buy-in in your organization for ERM. So that is one path. The second path is, now we've had our tier, we've set our internal committee with management. Now, how are you going to leverage the people in the organization that do that daily process, that have that knowledge, that are out there reading regulations that are related to their particular subset and their particular focus? Those people have a lot of knowledge, right? Because if we're at risk and we're like, okay, what's the control here? What's the risk here? And we're reading this procedure. This is just a piece of paper, okay? We all know that when they get behind the computer, maybe it's been a really rough day. Maybe a new round of PPP loans have come out. Maybe they broke up with their boyfriend last night and they're just not in the mood today. And that process changes a little bit. And we know what the procedure says, but hey, we can really do it this way. And unless you are engaging those people and having those conversations, you really don't know what your control is. You really don't know how that is working correctly. So I would urge you to find a way to engage the next level, engage the individual management of each department, find a way in your risk process and a risk evaluation. You know, we do job shadowing, we do interviewing, and then we have also created something called a workshop that happens on an annual basis. So we pretty much get the management of each area in the room. We run through vendor management, ERM, and business continuity management, all of my concentrations. I bring lunch in because if not, no one would come. And then we have a 4-hour conversation that's really driven by taking a look at the risk that's present with your vendor management and your vendors, taking a look that's present in your business continuity management, you know, creating that roadmap for IT, checking that roadmap for IT on an annual basis, and then having a strategic conversation about ERM. This is our strategic plan. And here's 20 questions that are related to how this works with the concentrations of risk. Let's talk about them. Let's see what you guys are doing. Let's see what you care about, what matters, because If not, you're setting your risk calendar, you're doing your evaluation. You've said, okay, I'm gonna look at these 5 processes in lending. This is gonna be great. I know that it's gonna be great. And then you present your information to management and they don't care about any of them because it's not what matters to them. It's not the thing that's keeping them awake at night. One of my favorite questions to ask is, what is keeping you awake? Work related, not just, the boyfriends and the Ben and Jerry's, but really kind of honing in on what matters to them. Because the more that you kind of create that conversation, the more that you create an environment that they feel like they can have that conversation with you and trust you with that conversation, the better your risk program will be.
Absolutely. Well, Denise, thank you so much for spending your morning with us. This has been a wonderful conversation, and please keep waving that compliance flag in your risk department. Thank you.
I absolutely will. I feel like if I don't, that bad things will befall me, meaning Stephanie Lyons will stop being one of my very best friends. And I don't know that I can handle that.
Well, thank you again. Have a good one.
You too.
Hey everyone, that wraps up another great episode of the Ncast, where we are able to talk with people on the front lines of risk and compliance across the financial services industry. If you liked what you heard, please leave us a review. And if you're not subscribed yet, we invite you to do so on your favorite podcast platform. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you soon.